What happens when one of the most polarizing hosts on television comes face to face with royalty's most controversial figure? You won't believe what unfolds when Meghan Markle sits down with Piers Morgan and their conversation spirals completely out of control. Last night's episode delivered the kind of television drama that networks dream of. But what started as a seemingly civil discussion quickly descended into absolute chaos. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two powerhouses clash in what became one of the most explosive confrontations in recent television history. The stage was set from the moment Meghan Markle walked onto the set. The tension was palpable as she took her seat across from Piers Morgan, who had been notoriously critical of her and Prince Harry's departure from royal duties. The studio audience could sense something brewing, as Morgan's trademark smirk played across his face while Meghan maintained her composed, almost regal posture. "Meghan, wonderful to have you here," Morgan began, his tone dripping with barely concealed sarcasm. "I have to say, it takes real courage to sit down with someone who's been as honest about your choices as I have been." Meghan's smile never wavered, but there was steel in her voice when she responded. "Piers, I've always believed in facing difficult conversations head-on, though I do wonder if your version of honesty is what most people would call it." The first jab had been thrown, and Morgan's eyes lit up with the kind of predatory gleam that his regular viewers knew all too well. He leaned forward slightly, already sensing weakness he could exploit. "Let's cut straight to it then," Morgan pressed on, his voice taking on that familiar confrontational edge. "The British public invested millions in your wedding, welcomed you with open arms, and then you essentially told them all to go to hell when you decided California was more appealing than royal duty. How do you justify that level of ingratitude?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon, and Meghan's composure flickered for just a moment before she regained her footing. "That's an incredibly reductive way to frame a complex situation, Piers. The British public deserved honesty about what was happening behind closed doors, and that's exactly what Harry and I provided." "Honesty?" Morgan scoffed, his voice rising slightly. "You mean the carefully choreographed sob story you fed to Oprah? The one where you painted yourself as the victim while trashing the institution that made you relevant in the first place?" The studio audience began to murmur, sensing the conversation was already heading into dangerous territory. Meghan's publicist, visible in the wings, shifted uncomfortably as her client's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "I find it fascinating," Meghan said, her voice growing colder, "that a man who's built his entire career on sensationalism and controversy would lecture anyone about honesty. Didn't you get fired from your last job for refusing to apologize for your own lies?" Morgan's face flushed red at the reference to his departure from Good Morning Britain, where his comments about Meghan had ultimately led to his exit. The personal attack had hit its mark, and the predator was now feeling cornered. "At least I stand by my convictions," Morgan shot back, his voice becoming more aggressive. "I don't flip-flop depending on which side of the Atlantic offers me a better deal. Tell me, Meghan, what's it like being a professional victim? Is there good money in it these days?" The insult landed like a slap across the face, and for the first time since sitting down, Meghan's carefully maintained composure began to crack. Her eyes flashed with genuine anger, and the temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. "Professional victim?" she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "That's rich coming from someone whose entire brand is built on attacking women who threaten your fragile masculinity. How many careers have you tried to destroy because you couldn't handle being challenged by someone smarter than you?" Morgan's laugh was harsh and mocking. "Oh, here we go with the feminist narrative. Everything's about gender with you people, isn't it? Can't possibly be that your actions have consequences. No, it must be because you're a woman that people see through your act." The conversation was rapidly approaching a point of no return, with both participants abandoning any pretense of civility. The studio crew exchanged nervous glances as the producer gestured frantically from behind the cameras, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the train wreck continue. "My act?" Meghan's voice was rising now, her American accent becoming more pronounced as her anger built. "You want to talk about acts? What about your pathetic obsession with trying to stay relevant by attacking anyone who won't kiss your ass? It's honestly embarrassing to watch." Morgan's face was now completely red, his carefully styled hair beginning to dishevel as he gesticulated more wildly. Embarrassing? You want to know what's embarrassing? Marrying into the most prestigious family in the world, and then spending every waking moment trashing them because they didn't treat you like the Hollywood princess you think you are. The audience was now completely silent, transfixed by the spectacle unfolding before them. What had started as pointed questions had devolved into a full-scale personal attack from both sides, with neither participant showing any signs of backing down. You don't know the first thing about what I experienced. Meghan fired back, her voice now trembling with rage. You've never walked in my shoes, faced the level of scrutiny and racism that was thrown at me daily. But instead of showing even an ounce of empathy, you chose to pile on because it got you headlines. Racism! Morgan practically shouted, his voice cracking slightly. Everything's about race with you, isn't it? Can't handle criticism without playing that card. It's pathetic. And frankly, it's insulting to people who've faced real discrimination. The words hung in the air like toxic gas, and even Morgan seemed to realize he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But the damage was done, and Meghan's eyes were now blazing with a fury that seemed barely contained. The confrontation had reached a boiling point, and something was about to give way. What happened next would become the stuff of television legend. The silence that followed Morgan's inflammatory comment lasted only seconds. But it felt like an eternity as everyone in the studio held their breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion. Meghan stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed to echo throughout the stunned studio. Her movements were deliberate, controlled, but there was something absolutely terrifying about her calm as she towered over the still-seated Morgan. You absolute piece of shit, she said, her voice deadly quiet but carrying clearly through the microphones. Did you really just sit there and tell me that the racism I experienced wasn't real? That the death threats, the constant harassment, the fucking Nazi salutes thrown at me were all in my head? Morgan's bravado faltered as he found himself looking up at her, suddenly aware that he was no longer in control of the situation. Now hang on. I never said. Don't you dare try to backtrack now. Meghan cut him off, her voice rising to a roar that made several audience members visibly flinch. You've spent years making a career out of attacking me, questioning my integrity, my motives, my fucking sanity. And now you have the balls to sit there and gasify my experiences? The producer was frantically signaling to cut to commercial, but the camera operators, sensing television gold, kept rolling. This was the kind of unscripted drama that networks would kill for, and everyone in the room knew they were witnessing something unprecedented. You think this is some kind of game? Meghan continued, her voice cracking with emotion. You think my pain, my family's pain, is just content for your pathetic show? Harry and I didn't leave because we wanted to hurt anyone. We left because staying would have fucking killed me, literally killed me, and you sat there every morning cheering it on. Morgan tried to stand, perhaps attempting to regain some semblance of authority. But Meghan's fury was like a force field keeping him pinned to his chair. Meghan, you're being hysterical. Hysterical? The word exploded from her lips like a gunshot. Oh, there it is. The classic misogynistic bullshit. A woman stands up for herself and suddenly she's hysterical. You wouldn't dare call a man hysterical for defending his family, would you, Piers? The audience was now completely silent, some covering their mouths in shock at the language and intensity of the confrontation. Security guards had appeared at the edges of the set, unsure whether to intervene or let the spectacle continue. Morgan's face had gone from red to almost purple, sweat beading on his forehead as he struggled to maintain his composure. I've always been fair in my criticism. Fair? Meghan let out a laugh that was more like a bark. You called me a liar on national television without a shred of evidence. You questioned whether my children were really royal blood. You suggested I was manipulating Harry, controlling him like some kind of puppet master. And you call that fair? She began pacing now, her energy too explosive to contain in one spot. You want to know what's really pathetic, Piers? It's that you're so threatened by a woman who wouldn't kiss your ass that you've dedicated years of your life to tearing her down. What kind of sad, small man does that make you? Morgan finally found his voice, his own anger now matching hers. I'm threatened? By you? That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You're a D-list actress who got lucky and married a prince, and now you think that makes you untouchable. There it is. Meghan spun around to face him directly, her eyes blazing. The real Piers Morgan, everyone. Strip away the fake charm and the manufactured outrage, and what's left? A bitter old man who can't stand that a woman he considers beneath him won't play by his rules. The studio felt like a powder keg ready to explode. Crew members were exchanging panicked glances, and the producer had given up trying to signal for a commercial break. This was live television at its most raw and unfiltered. "I never said you were beneath me," Morgan protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "You didn't need to say it," Meghan shot back. "It's written all over your face every time you mention my name. The contempt, the disgust, the absolute inability to comprehend that someone like me could dare to challenge the precious British establishment that you worship like a religion." Morgan rose from his chair now, his own composure finally shattering completely. "Don't you dare lecture me about the establishment. I've been challenging authority longer than you've been famous." "Challenging authority?" Meghan's laugh was harsh and mocking. "You are the fucking establishment, Piers. You're everything that's wrong with this country's media. This obsession with tearing people down instead of building them up." The confrontation had now devolved into a full-scale screaming match, with both participants abandoning any pretense of professional behavior. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every ugly word, every twisted expression of rage and contempt. "At least I'm honest about who I am," Morgan roared back. "I don't hide behind victimhood and woke politics to avoid accountability for my actions." "Victimhood?" Meghan's voice hit a pitch that seemed to make the studio lights flicker. "You want to talk about victimhood? Every single day you go on television and whine about cancel culture, about how unfairly you've been treated, about how the world doesn't appreciate your genius? You're the biggest fucking victim in this room." The words hit Morgan like physical blows, and for a moment he seemed genuinely stunned into silence. But the quiet didn't last long, as his own rage reignited with even more intensity. "How dare you?" he sputtered, spittle flying from his lips. "How fucking dare you stand there and accuse me of being a victim when you've made an entire career out of playing one?" The studio had become a battlefield, with these two forces of nature locked in combat while everyone else could only watch in horrified fascination. Neither showed any signs of backing down, and the confrontation was reaching a crescendo that threatened to destroy everything in its path. What happened next would be replayed on social media millions of times within hours. Meghan suddenly stopped pacing, her chest heaving as she stared down at Morgan with a look of pure disgust that seemed to freeze everyone in the studio. "You know what, Piers?" she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than all her previous shouting. "I'm done. I'm done with you. I'm done with this pathetic excuse for journalism. And I'm done pretending that you deserve even one more second of my time." Morgan, sensing she was about to leave, made one final desperate attempt to regain control. "Oh, running away again? Just like you ran away from your royal duties? Just like you ran away from your own father?" The mention of her father was the final straw. Meghan's face went completely white, then flushed red with a rage so pure it seemed to radiate heat. Several audience members actually leaned back in their seats as if physically pushed by the force of her fury. "My father," she repeated, her voice barely human now. "You want to bring up my father? The man who sold stories about me to the tabloids? The man who staged paparazzi photos for money? You're defending that piece of shit?" Morgan realized too late that he'd made a catastrophic error, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. At least, he didn't abandon his country and his family for Hollywood money. The studio erupted. Meghan let out a scream of pure rage that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. "Fuck you! Fuck you and fuck everyone who thinks like you!" She grabbed the glass of water from the table next to her chair and hurled it directly at Morgan's face. The water exploded across his expensive suit as he jumped backward, slipping slightly and nearly falling over his chair. The studio audience gasped collectively, some screaming, others pulling out their phones to record the chaos. "You absolute monster!" Meghan continued screaming as security finally started moving toward the set. "You destroyed my relationship with my father with your constant harassment and lies, and now you use it as a weapon against me? You're not a journalist, you're a fucking parasite." Morgan, dripping wet and completely humiliated, tried one last pathetic attempt at authority. "Security! Get her out of here! This is assault!" Meghan laughed, a sound so bitter and filled with contempt that it seemed to poison the air around her. Assault? You want to see assault? You pathetic excuse for a man? She reached for the heavy glass award that sat on Morgan's desk, some meaningless trophy from his years of manufacturing controversy. For a moment, everyone in the studio held their breath, wondering if she would actually throw it at his head. Instead, she lifted it high above her head and brought it crashing down onto the desk, shattering it into 1,000 pieces that scattered across the set like deadly confetti. The sound was deafening, and several people in the front row covered their heads as glass fragments flew through the air. "That's what I think of your career, your show, and everything you stand for," she screamed over the chaos. "You're a relic from a dying era, Piers, a sad old man clinging to relevance by attacking women who are stronger, smarter, and more successful than you'll ever be." Security guards were now on the set, but they seemed hesitant to actually touch her, perhaps recognizing that laying hands on a member of the royal family, even an estranged one, might not be the wisest career move. Morgan, his face a mask of humiliation and rage, pointed a shaking finger at her. "You're insane. Absolutely fucking insane. This is exactly why the royal family wanted nothing to do with you." Meghan's smile was terrifying in its coldness. "The royal family? You mean the same family that just stripped Andrew of his titles for being a pedophile? The same family that covered up Charles's affair for decades? Yeah, I'm really heartbroken about not being part of that club." The final blow had been delivered, and everyone knew it. Morgan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. His face had gone completely pale, and he seemed to shrink before everyone's eyes. Meghan straightened her jacket with deliberate calm, her rage transforming into icy dignity. "Ladies and gentlemen," she addressed the studio audience directly, ignoring Morgan completely. "You've just witnessed exactly why independent journalism is dead in this country. When men like this are given platforms to spread hate and misinformation, when they're rewarded for cruelty and vindictiveness, we all suffer." She turned back to Morgan one final time, her voice dropping to a whisper that the microphones barely caught. "You're pathetic, Piers, and deep down, you know it. That's why you spend every day trying to tear down people who have what you'll never have: integrity, courage, and the respect of people who actually matter." With that, she walked off the set with her head held high, her heels clicking against the floor in the sudden silence. The studio doors slammed behind her with a finality that seemed to echo through the building. Morgan stood alone among the wreckage of his desk, water dripping from his hair, surrounded by broken glass and the stunned silence of his crew and audience. For the first time in his career, Piers Morgan had been completely and utterly destroyed on his own show. The cameras continued rolling for several more seconds, capturing his humiliation in excruciating detail before the producer finally found his voice and screamed, "Cut!" The red recording light went dark, but the damage was already done. Within minutes, footage of the confrontation was spreading across every social media platform on Earth. "Meghan Destroys Media" was trending worldwide before Morgan had even left the studio. The interview that was supposed to be his triumph had become his complete and total annihilation. As the crew began cleaning up the destruction, one thing was abundantly clear. This wasn't just a celebrity meltdown or a publicity stunt gone wrong. This was the moment when years of accumulated rage, frustration, and injustice had finally exploded in the most spectacular fashion possible. Meghan Markle had walked onto that set as a guest, but she left as something else entirely. A woman who had finally said exactly what millions of people had been thinking for years. And Piers Morgan? He was left standing in the ruins of his own making, finally facing the consequences of a career built on cruelty and contempt.